Welcome to the Habits of Health Power Half Hour, where we go through Dr. A's Habits of Health one section at a time so that you can create a powerful knowledge base that will equip you for your journey into optimal health and lifelong well being. My name is Cassondra Reagan, and I am an independent Optavia coach. Today, as we begin section 2.1 of the Habits of Health, I would like to bridge part one and part two by briefly reviewing where we came from and kind of give you some information on where we're going. In part one, preparing for your journey, we established why it's not your fault you're struggling by explaining how our modern busy lifestyle, highly processed, highly glycemic, sedentary world is at odds with our ancient biological and mental design. This discord shows up for a majority of the world as a progressive deterioration of our physical, mental, social, and even spiritual lives. We also learned that we can fight this decline, but it's going to involve us taking personal responsibility by focusing on what we want to create and become rather than on the problem that we have to solve. And it's going to take embracing the habits of health transformative process in order to create this health. We also talked about in the first part about how important it is to examine your readiness to begin your journey. Remember those 6 levels of readiness? We also touched briefly on those 6 macro habits of health and how installation of these macro habits will help you combat living in this rapidly changing world. And finally, we came to the foundational tools of habit installation and stop, challenge, choose. Both of these tools, habit installation, the habit loop, and stop, challenge, choose, both of these are the bedrock of the process of transformation, and you need them both to move forward into this next chapter. One, to install these macro habits we are about to explore in more depth, and two, to navigate our emotional and impulsive responses to the world around us as we begin to change. It is not going to be easy. I'm just going to tell you now, but it's so worth it. So here we are now in section 2.1, and Dr. A starts with one of my favorite illustrations, and it's one I heard in a leadership class in college. So it goes a little bit something like this. A professor enters a lecture hall carrying a large jar, a bag of big rocks, a bag of pebbles, a bag of sand, and a pitcher of water. And he puts that big jar on his desk, and he begins to unload and put these big rocks in this jar until he fills it up. And he looks at the class and he says, "Is the jar full?" And the whole class goes, "Yes." So then he proceeds to take the bag of pebbles, and he begins to empty the bag of pebbles into the jar, shakes the jar, lets the pebbles settle down, and keeps adding pebbles until he can't add anymore. He shakes them all down, they settle, and he adds it till it's full. Then he asks the class, "Is the jar full?" And a majority of the class says yes. So then he takes the bag of sand and he does the same thing. He proceeds to empty the sand, shake it until it settles, empty the sand until he can't get any more sand in there. At this point, some of the students are catching on, and he asks the class again, "Is the jar full?" And only a handful of kids in the class say yes. So finally, he proceeds to take the pitcher of water and he pours the water into the jar, and it fills up to the very top. And he asks the class one last time, "Is the jar full?" Now, at this point, the class doesn't know what to think. They don't know what the answer is, so they don't say anything. Then he asked them one last question. What is the moral of this illustration? And one eager beaver lifts his hand and he says, "Just when you think you can't shove anything else into your schedule, you can always fit one more thing." And the professor says, "No, that is not the point of the illustration. The point of the illustration is this: if you do not put your big rocks in first, you'll never get them in." So that's a powerful illustration. So, what are the big rocks in your life? Well, all the way in section 2.16, 2.16, Dr. Call will call these rocks what matters most. So, yes, of course, your loved ones and the things you are passionate about. These are big rocks. But the reality is, you won't have those two things if you lose your health. So these macro habits of health must be the prioritized big rocks in your life so that you can have more time on earth with loved ones and have the vitality to pursue those passions. So let's review these 6 macro habits of health again. Okay, so these 6 macro habits we have the macro habit of healthy weight management, the macro habit of healthy eating and hydration, the macro habit of healthy motion. We have the macro habit of healthy sleep and energy management, the macro habit of a healthy mind, and emotions are also included in that. And finally, we have the macro habit of healthy surroundings. The 6 macro habits of health are the foundations of optimal health and well being. These rocks must be placed in the jar of your life first, or you will fill your life with all the other things. How many of us have already done that? We've been there, done that. It didn't work out for us, right? So, only once these rocks are prioritized and put in the jar will we be able to create a lifelong transformation and create a habit barrier that protects us from a world that actually promotes habits of disease. Over time, we have to address and install all 6 of these macro habits of health. And you guys, it fascinates me how these 6 different arenas of health are intricately tied together. And when one pillar is weak, it causes the whole health structure to falter and become unstable. My husband, for example, has had seasons where he has completely crushed his nutrition and exercise goals, but his struggles with being a night owl has chronically become the one thing that undermines and topples his health journey every single time. Excuse me, late nights make him hungry, and so he eats off plan. The late nights throw his circadian rhythm off, and the lack of sleep actually disrupts his hormones, creating hunger and cravings throughout the following day. He becomes exhausted from the lack of sleep and just he becomes too tired to exercise, which then adds to the chronic inflammation in his body, which we now know causes depression and anxiety. And finally, that anxiety perpetuates his inability to go to bed at a healthy time. Can you see how interwoven the macro habits can be? And can you understand the need to address all 6 areas and not just maybe one or two or a few? It's not all just nutrition and exercise, it's all of these. To continue with the jar analogy, remember the big rocks first, the macro habits of health. Dr. A says that the pebbles poured into the jar, the little pebbles, can represent the primary and secondary habits that are derived from the macro habits to support and reinforce those big rocks. So, do you remember when we talked about primary and secondary habits? And finally, the sand, that can be thought of as the micro habits of health, the thousands of small choices that are a part of our daily life, the positive actions that are so small, you can always do them. Our chaotic, unhealthy, stressful world that is full of unhealthy food, it's not going to change. So we have to empower ourselves with the ability to reach and sustain a healthy weight, the macro habit of healthy weight management. That will be the first big rock we will place in that jar, and it will set the stage for introducing the other big rocks later. So, part 2, section 2.1 and on, is a large portion of this book. It's actually maybe almost half of this book, and it's comprising over 16 sections, many of which will include more than one of those macro habits. But don't worry, we are going to do a thorough examination of each and every one. Um, However, the macro habit of the habit of healthy surroundings, we're not going to spend one section on that. In fact, we are going to talk about that, and it's going to be embedded throughout all of part two. Every time we address one of the macro habits, we're also going to address the habit of healthy surroundings, because addressing and modifying your surroundings for each macro habit will be necessary throughout your transformation and your total journey. So remember, this isn't going to happen overnight. Your weight and your unhealthy lifestyle didn't happen overnight. This is a progressive journey that we are going to take step by step together. So that's it for today, everyone. Next week, we begin with the first keystone macro habit of healthy weight management, which is a habit that eludes so many because because it is interdependent on so many factors. But in the upcoming episodes, we are going to unpack it together. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode to your friends who need health. Have a blessed week, and I'll see you next time.